The Flamingo Hotel, Las Vegas, January 1963. 3:30 in the morning. The kind of hour when honest people are asleep and important business gets done. The private dining room exists in shadow and amber light. Crystal tumblers catch the glow from table lamps. Cigarette smoke moves slowly through air thick with cologne and authority. The mahogany table has seen handshake deals worth more than most banks hold. 5 men sit in leather chairs that cost more than cars. They don't raise their voices. When you control Las Vegas, you don't need to. Frank Sinatra occupies the chair closest to the head of the table. He leans forward slightly, eager, attentive. The body language of someone who needs to belong. The door opens. Dean Martin enters 20 minutes late. His tuxedo jacket hangs open, bow tie undone. A highball glass already in his hand, though no one saw him pour it. He moves like a man walking through his own living room. "Dean." The greeting comes from the figure at the head of the table. Not warm, not cold. Business. "Gentlemen." Dean settles into the remaining chair, doesn't hurry. The offer is simple, elegant. Exclusive Las Vegas residency, guaranteed money, protection that extends beyond Nevada, partnership with the most powerful entertainment organization in America. Frank watches Dean's face, waiting for gratitude, for recognition of the honor being extended. Dean listens, nods once, takes a sip of his drink. "That's generous," he says, "but I'm busy." Not hostile, not apologetic, just busy. The room goes quiet, and in that quiet, something begins to shift. To understand what happened in that room, you need to understand how Las Vegas worked in 1963. Entertainment wasn't just business, it was politics. Every major performer who wanted to work the Strip entered into an arrangement, unspoken but absolute. You performed when called, you attended the right events, you showed proper respect to the right people. In return, you enjoyed protection, promotion, and profits that Hollywood couldn't match. The system worked because it was built on need. Frank Sinatra needed their approval. Despite his fame, despite his talent, Frank craved acceptance from powerful men. When they suggested he postpone a recording session, Frank postponed it. When they recommended he avoid certain associations, Frank avoided them. This wasn't weakness, this was survival. Sammy Davis Jr. understood the rules even more clearly. As a black entertainer in 1963, Sammy couldn't afford powerful enemies. When pressure came to delay his wedding, Sammy delayed his wedding. When advice came about which clubs to avoid, Sammy listened. Everyone understood. You could be successful in Las Vegas, or you could be independent, not both. The men who controlled the Strip had seen what happened to performers who forgot their place. Careers ended overnight. Bookings disappeared. Sometimes, people disappeared. But leverage only works if the other person fears losing what they have. Which brings us back to that dining room, to the moment Dean Martin said he was busy, to the silence that followed. Because in that silence, the most powerful men in Nevada were discovering something they'd never encountered before. Someone who genuinely didn't care what they could take away. Dean Martin was born Dino Paul Cricchetti in Steubenville, Ohio, in 1917. Steel mill town. Immigrant father. Poverty wasn't just his childhood, it was his education. By 16, Dean was boxing professionally, fighting under the name Kid Crochet, not because he loved violence, but because he needed money. Legal work in Steubenville paid barely enough to survive. Illegal work paid better. Dean dealt cards in backroom gambling operations, worked the steel mills when boxing didn't pay. These weren't adventures, they were lessons in survival. The most important lesson, hardship ends. Fame, money, comfort, these things disappear. But if you've already lost everything once, you stop being afraid of losing it again. When Dean moved to New York, then Hollywood, then Las Vegas, he carried that steel mill pragmatism with him. Other entertainers saw their careers as their identity.
Dean saw his career as his current job. The difference was everything. Frank Sinatra, for all his toughness, had never truly lost everything. His need for powerful connections was partly professional, partly personal, partly psychological. Frank required approval from important people to feel complete. Dean didn't require anything from anyone. This wasn't arrogance. This was experience. Dean understood something about confrontation that his colleagues missed. Fighting power makes you dependent on power. Opposing authority gives authority importance. But ignoring authority, genuinely not caring what authority thinks, removes you from the game entirely. When Dean said, "I'm busy," that January night, he wasn't being defiant. Defiance suggests you care enough to resist. Dean was being honest. He was busy, and what they were offering wasn't interesting enough to change his schedule.
Inside the Flamingo dining room, the silence stretches. 10 minutes. In any other context, 10 minutes would be nothing. But when powerful men are accustomed to immediate compliance, 10 minutes becomes geological time. The figure at the head of the table finally speaks. "Dean, I don't think you understand what we're offering." Dean nods. "I understand, and I appreciate it." Another pause. But I'm busy." Frank Sinatra shifts in his chair. His discomfort is visible. This isn't how these meetings work. This isn't how anyone talks to these men. Busy with what? The question carries an edge. Dean considers this seriously, takes another sip of his drink. Things. The word hangs in the air like smoke. No one knows what to do with it. Another voice tries a different approach. The money alone would set you up for life. "I'm already set up." Dean's response comes without hesitation, without calculation. More silence. The men exchange glances. This is uncharted territory. In their experience, everyone wants something. Everyone has pressure points. Everyone can be influenced. But influence requires leverage, and leverage requires need. Dean orders another drink from the casino staff, acts as if he's at a dinner party. The power in the room begins to feel unstable. Not because Dean is threatening anyone, but because he's not threatened by anyone. And that changes everything. Slowly, quietly, the men around that table begin to understand what they're dealing with. You cannot threaten someone who isn't afraid. What would they threaten Dean with? Ending his career? Dean had survived unemployment before. Financial ruin? Dean had been poor. He knew poverty wasn't death. Physical violence? That would make them look desperate and ineffective, because you can't beat independence out of someone who's already free. More importantly, Dean's refusal wasn't personal. He wasn't insulting them. He wasn't challenging their authority. He simply wasn't interested in what they were selling. This created an impossible situation. Their power structure was built on controlling access to success. But Dean didn't need their version of success. He was content with what he already had. They controlled Las Vegas entertainment through a combination of opportunity and intimidation. But what do you do with someone who doesn't want the opportunity and isn't intimidated by the alternative? Frank Sinatra watches this realization spread around the table. His own position suddenly feels precarious. If Dean can say no without consequences, what does that make Frank's yes worth? The meeting effectively ends without ending. Dean finishes his drink, thanks everyone for their time, and walks out the same way he walked in. Unhurried, unimpressed, unchanged. Behind him, the most powerful men in Nevada sit in silence, trying to understand what just happened. They had encountered something completely outside their experience. A man who genuinely didn't need them. Independence, even Dean Martin's kind, comes with a price. Within a week, Frank Sinatra begins distancing himself from Dean. Not dramatically, not publicly, just gradually. Phone calls become less frequent, invitations stop coming. When the Rat Pack gathers, Dean is often not included.
Frank's reaction isn't malice, it's self-preservation. Dean's refusal to join the Las Vegas power structure makes everyone else's participation look like weakness or desperation. Dean didn't fight this isolation. He didn't demand inclusion. He simply accepted it. This might be the most remarkable aspect of Dean's character. He understood that choosing independence meant choosing solitude, and he was comfortable with solitude. Most entertainers fear being forgotten, becoming irrelevant, losing their place in the social ecosystem of success. Dean feared none of these things. He continued performing, recording, appearing on television, but always on his own terms. The Vegas offers stopped coming, not because anyone was angry, but because everyone understood they were pointless. Dean had removed himself from their system of influence. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't want what you're offering. Other performers noticed the change. Some admired Dean's independence, most feared it. Because if Dean could walk away from the most powerful entertainment partnership in America, what does that make Frank's yes worth? It said they were afraid, and Dean wasn't. That difference would define the rest of his career.
What happened next was unprecedented in Las Vegas entertainment history. Nothing. No retaliation, no blacklisting, no mysterious problems with bookings or broadcast deals. The men who controlled Las Vegas simply left Dean alone. Not out of respect, out of recognition. They had learned something that night at the Flamingo. There are people you cannot touch, not because they're too powerful, but because they're too free. Dean continued working Las Vegas when he wanted to, on stages he chose. For money, he negotiated directly. The difference was subtle, but absolute. Dean was no longer part of their system. He was a free agent in the truest sense. Other entertainers watched this with a mixture of admiration and terror. Dean had achieved something they all claimed to want: complete artistic and personal freedom. But freedom came with isolation, and most entertainers would rather belong to something, even something that controlled them, than stand entirely alone. Dean's reputation grew in unexpected ways. Stories spread. The man who said no to the mob, the entertainer who couldn't be bought, threatened, or influenced. These stories weren't entirely accurate. Dean hadn't fought the mob, he hadn't exposed them or challenged them. He had simply declined to work with them. But in Las Vegas, in Hollywood, in the entertainment world of the 1960s, simply saying no was revolutionary. And revolution, even quiet revolution, creates legends. Dean Martin worked until the late 1980s. He never spoke publicly about that January night at the Flamingo. When journalists asked about his relationship with Las Vegas power figures, he would smile and say everyone had been professional. His choice that night didn't change the entertainment industry. It didn't reform Las Vegas. It didn't even significantly impact anyone except Dean himself. But it revealed something profound about the nature of power. Most people spend their lives accumulating things they believe will make them free: money, fame, influence, status. They think if they can just acquire enough, they'll be beyond fear, beyond need, beyond vulnerability. Dean Martin understood that freedom doesn't come from having more, it comes from needing less. He didn't fight the system, he didn't try to reform it, he didn't expose its flaws or challenge its methods. He simply refused to be part of it. In a world where everyone was performing, for audiences, for peers, for powerful patrons, Dean Martin's greatest performance was choosing not to perform when the performance wasn't on his terms. The men in that Flamingo dining room wielded enormous power over American entertainment. They could make careers or destroy them with a phone call. They controlled access to the most profitable venues in the country. But they couldn't control a man who was genuinely busy with his own life. And that night,
They learned something they'd never considered before. There are people you simply cannot reach, not because they're too high above you, but because they're too content where they are. Real power isn't what you can take from others, it's what others cannot take from you. And Dean Martin, walking out of that room into the Las Vegas night, carried with him the only power that truly matters. The power to say no, and mean it.